All right, so today we're going to dive deep into, a major political earthquake, the end of the Assad family's five-decade rule in Syria. I know you've been following this story, pretty closely, and I don't blame you. The implications are absolutely massive. We're talking about, reshaping the power dynamics in Syria and the entire Middle East. So in this deep dive, let's try to unpack what exactly led to this, monumental shift, what it means for the people of Syria, and what role these international players have in all this.
It's really remarkable, how quickly this dynasty, which seemed unshakable for so long, has crumbled. I mean, for years, the Assad regime survived, brutal crackdowns,
Hmm.
international condemnation, even a civil war. And now it's gone.
Gone just like that.
Yeah.
To really understand how we got here, we need to rewind a bit back to 1971, when Hafez al-Assad Bashar's father took the reins. It was the beginning of an era of authoritarian rule focused on silencing dissent and maintaining absolute control.
Hafez al-Assad was incredibly shrewd, particularly during the Cold War. For example, he managed to secure aid from the Soviet Union. While simultaneously building a relationship with the West, he played both sides essentially, using the strategic ambiguity to strengthen Syria's position and ensure his own family's grip on power.
That's a great point. He wasn't just a strong man, he was a master political chess player.
Hmm.
But even the most skilled chess player can be checkmated. And for the Assad regime, the game changer was the Arab Spring in 2011.
Exactly. These pro-democracy protests that swept across the region, put immense pressure on the regime. And the response was, as we know, brutal and violent. This ultimately led to a devastating civil war, a humanitarian catastrophe, with over 500,000 lives lost and millions more displaced. And of course, this conflict opened the door for all sorts of international involvement, creating a tangled web of alliances and competing interests.
Now let's untangle that web a bit, shall we? Starting with Russia. They were initially Assad's biggest backer, providing crucial military aid that kept the regime afloat for years. But as you know, the situation with Ukraine has really shifted Russia's priorities.
Russia's focus has undeniably shifted. Their resources are stretched, and their relationship with the West has become even more strained. This has directly impacted their commitment to Syria, and their waning support for Assad created an opening that other players were quick to exploit.
Like Iran, for example. They've been a longtime ally of Assad, driven by their shared strategic interests. And that historic link through opposing Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War. But even they've decided to pull back.
Iran's withdrawal is a fascinating development. They're essentially acknowledging that the costs of backing Assad, particularly with Russia's waning influence, outweigh the benefits. It's a sign of just how dramatically the geopolitical landscape is shifting.
It's like everyone's reassessing their positions and trying to figure out their next move. And then there's the U.S. and its allies. Their involvement has been primarily focused on combating ISIS, supporting various rebel groups and Kurdish forces.
The U.S.'s role in Syria has always been a delicate balancing act. They've provided some support to certain opposition groups, but they've also been cautious about getting too deeply involved in the conflict.
Makes sense. They've had their hands full in other parts of the world. And we can't forget about Turkey, another key player in this regional power struggle. They've got their own ambitions in northern Syria, which often lead to clashes with the Kurdish forces.
Turkey's involvement adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation. The point is, every single player in this arena is watching closely, making calculated moves to try and secure their interests as the old order collapses. But amidst all this geopolitical maneuvering, the most dramatic development, the one that really signaled the end of an era, was the fall of Damascus.
Right, that was stunning. Seeing opposition forces capture parts of Damascus, the very heart of Assad's power. It was a symbolic blow that seemed to trigger everything that followed.
The fall of Damascus was a decisive moment. It exposed the regime's vulnerability and arguably forced Assad's hand. Fleeing to Moscow under an asylum deal, a move likely orchestrated by Russia to maintain some level of control, was really his only option at that point.
Wow, I guess you could say he was checkmated after all.
Yeah.
So we've got Assad out of the picture, at least for now, and a whole bunch of international players with their own agendas circling around a war-torn Syria. It begs the question, what happens now? Does this open the door for stability, or is this just the beginning of even more chaos?
It's a pivotal moment, that's for sure. The potential for both outcomes, stability, and chaos is very real. On one hand, Assad's departure removes a major obstacle to peace.
I can see that. It could create space for a new, more inclusive political system to emerge, one that finally addresses the root causes of the conflict.
Exactly. But on the other hand, there's a huge risk of a power vacuum.
right? With all these different factions vying for control, it could easily descend into infighting and violence, possibly even worse than before.
That's the danger. And let's not forget about the external forces. Their meddling could easily exacerbate tensions and turn Syria into a proxy battleground for their own regional rivalries. It's a delicate situation with a lot of potential for things to go very wrong.
And we can't ignore Israel's role in all of this. They've been taking some controversial steps, actions they deem necessary for their own security, but that many see as destabilizing and potentially unlawful.
Israel's actions are a clear reminder of the deep-seated anxiety surrounding Syria's future, particularly from its neighbors. They fear a hostile government on their border, one that could align with their adversaries. It's a complex regional dynamic with historical tensions and security concerns, adding another layer of complexity to the situation.
So we've got this incredibly intricate situation unfolding with internal and external forces pulling in all directions. But amidst all the uncertainty, there's this intriguing talk of a potential grand bargain, a deal involving major players like Russia, the US, and even China.
There's definitely speculation about a possible deal that could reshape the global order as we know it. The rumored terms involve significant concessions on all sides, with Russia potentially retaining parts of eastern Ukraine, Iran getting relief from sanctions, and China gaining more control over Hong Kong.
It sounds almost too good to be true. Can Russia really be reintegrated into the Western fold after everything that's happened? And what about the potential for a shift in U.S. foreign policy? This deal, even if it were to come to fruition, is fraught with uncertainty and risk.
It's a high-stakes gamble, no doubt about it. Any deal of this magnitude would require immense diplomatic maneuvering and concessions from all parties involved. And even if they managed to reach an agreement, its long-term success would hinge on a multitude of factors, including internal political dynamics in each country and the ever-shifting global landscape.
Okay, so we've got this potential global chess match playing out in the background. But let's bring it back to the heart of the matter. The Syrian people themselves. They're the ones who've borne the brunt of this conflict, enduring unimaginable suffering. What does Assad's departure and this uncertain future mean for them?
For Syrians, this is both a moment of immense hope and profound anxiety. The end of the Assad regime signifies the end of an era of oppression and tyranny, but the path forward is shrouded in uncertainty.
They're facing the daunting task of rebuilding their lives and their nation from the ground up. It's a monumental challenge, to say the least.
Indeed, the road ahead for Syria is long and arduous. But amid all the complexities and challenges, let's not lose sight of the human element, the resilience and courage of the Syrian people. Their story is far from over.
Well, that's a good point to pause on. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the historical context to the intricacies of the conflict and the potential for both hope and further turmoil. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into the challenges facing Syria, exploring the road to reconstruction, the plight of refugees, and the possibilities for a brighter future. Stay with us.
Let's shift our focus now to the immense challenges that lie ahead for Syria.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to talk about the road to recovery.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's hard to even know where to begin. Decades of war have left the country in ruins, from shattered cities to a crippled economy. It's a truly daunting task.
Daunting is an understatement. Rebuilding Syria will require a Herculean effort, one that demands a sustained commitment from both the Syrian people and the international community.
You've been following this conflict for years, so I'm curious, what do you see as the most pressing issue? Where do they even start?
Well, it's all interconnected, but I'd say the most immediate concern is addressing the humanitarian crisis. Millions of Syrians are in desperate need of food, shelter, medical care, basic necessities. Providing humanitarian aid is not only a moral imperative, it's essential for stabilizing the situation and preventing further suffering.
Okay, so humanitarian aid is paramount. But what about the longer-term challenges? Things like rebuilding infrastructure and fostering a sense of national unity after such a divisive conflict.
Those are the million-dollar questions. And they're incredibly complex. We're talking about healing deep societal wounds, rebuilding trust between communities that have been pitted against each other. It's going to require a long and delicate process of reconciliation involving open dialogue, addressing past grievances, and finding ways to move forward together.
And that's all happening against the backdrop of this massive reconstruction effort.
Exactly. Rebuilding Syria's infrastructure is a mammoth undertaking. We're talking about roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, entire cities that need to be rebuilt from the ground up. It's going to require billions of dollars in aid expertise from around the world and a level of coordination that, frankly, the international community hasn't always been great at.
And all of that hinges on ensuring those billions of dollars are used effectively and transparently.
Accountability and transparency will be crucial. We've seen too many instances where aid money gets lost to corruption or mismanagement. The international community needs to work closely with Syrian civil society organizations, local communities, to ensure that aid reaches those who need it most and is used to rebuild in a sustainable and equitable way.
It's a huge responsibility,
Yeah.
and the stakes couldn't be higher. And then, of course, there's the issue of the millions of Syrian refugees scattered across the region and the world. What happens to them?
The refugee crisis is a heartbreaking consequence of this conflict, and finding solutions for their safe and dignified return is paramount. Many of these refugees are living in precarious situations, facing discrimination and hardship. They want to go home, rebuild their lives, but they need guarantees of safety, security, and opportunity.
It's a delicate situation. They can't just be sent back to a country that's still in turmoil.
Absolutely not. The return of refugees needs to be voluntary, safe, and sustainable. And that requires creating conditions on the ground in Syria that make their return possible. Things like rebuilding homes and communities, providing economic opportunities, and ensuring access to basic services like healthcare and education.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, honestly.
Hmm.
And then there's the economy, which is in a state of utter collapse. How can they even begin to revive an economy that's been battered by years of war sanctions and displacement?
It's a colossal challenge. We're talking about high unemployment, widespread poverty, a currency that's been decimated. Reviving Syria's economy will require major reforms attracting foreign investment and creating a business environment that encourages growth and job creation.
You mentioned foreign investment, but who in their right mind would invest in a country that's still so unstable?
That's the dilemma, isn't it? Rebuilding trust both within Syria and with the international community is essential for attracting the investment needed to jumpstart the economy. And that trust needs to be earned through concrete actions, demonstrable progress towards peace and stability, and a commitment to good governance and the rule of law.
So we've got a pretty bleak picture here. A wrecked country, a fractured society, and a mountain of challenges. But amidst all of this, there's still hope, right? There's always a chance for things to turn around.
I firmly believe there's always hope. We've seen throughout history that even in the most dire situations, even after the most devastating conflicts, societies can heal, rebuild, and emerge stronger than before. It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight, but it is possible for Syria to forge a new path.
So given everything we've discussed, what do you see as the potential scenarios for Syria's future? What are the possibilities here?
Well, I think there are a few potential pathways forward. One possibility, the most optimistic one, is a relatively smooth transition to a new government, one that's genuinely inclusive and representative of Syria's diverse population.
Okay, so a new government that can unite the country and lead the way towards peace and reconstruction. It's a nice thought, but can it actually happen?
It's certainly possible, but it hinges on a few key factors. You need a willingness among the different factions to share power, to compromise, and to prioritize the needs of the nation over their own narrow interests. You also need sustained international support for this new government, both financially and politically.
And probably a whole lot of luck.
Luck never hurts. But realistically, the most likely scenario is a long and difficult road towards stability. There will be setbacks, power struggles, perhaps even renewed violence. The question is, can they manage these challenges without sliding back into full-blown conflict?
So a bumpy road, but hopefully one that leads in the right direction. What about the possibility of things going really wrong? What are the potential pitfalls here?
Well, the biggest risk, as we've discussed, is a descent into further chaos and violence. The power vacuum left by Assad's departure could be exploited by various factions, leading to renewed fighting and a fragmentation of the country.
I can see that happening. It's like a tinderbox just waiting for a spark to ignite it.
Exactly. And you have to factor in the potential for external meddling regional powers using Syria as a proxy battleground for their own conflicts. It's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so we've got the optimistic scenario, the bumpy road, and the potential for all-out chaos. Where do you think things are most likely to land?
It's impossible to say for sure, but I think the most likely scenario is somewhere between a bumpy road and a descent into chaos. It's going to be a long and difficult process with periods of progress followed by setbacks and the constant threat of renewed violence looming overhead.
So essentially a nail-biter of a situation.
Pretty much. The choices made by Syrian leaders, both political and within civil society, will be critical, but so too will the actions of the international community. They have a moral obligation to do everything in their power to support the Syrian people in their quest for a better future.
All right, we've painted a complex and, to be honest, quite somber picture of the situation in Syria. But amidst all the challenges, we have to hold on to hope. The Syrian people have endured unimaginable hardship, but they've also shown incredible resilience.
Absolutely. The human capacity for resilience, for rebuilding, for hope is truly remarkable. And I have no doubt that the Syrian people will find a way to move forward to rebuild their lives and their country. The road ahead will be long and difficult, but the human spirit has a way of overcoming even the most daunting obstacles.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about what the international community can do to support Syria during this critical period. We've touched on humanitarian aid and supporting reconstruction, but what else is crucial?
Well, I think a major focus needs to be on promoting dialogue and reconciliation. This means facilitating conversations between different communities, supporting local peace-building initiatives, and working to address the underlying causes of the conflict, things like inequality, discrimination, and human rights abuses.
That makes sense. You can't just throw money at the problem and expect it to go away. You need to address the root causes.
Exactly. And alongside those efforts, there needs to be a strong emphasis on accountability. The atrocities committed during this conflict cannot be swept under the rug.
You're talking about holding those responsible for war crimes and human rights abuses accountable for their actions.
Precisely. There needs to be a process of truth and reconciliation, a reckoning with the past, if there's going to be any hope for lasting peace. And that means investigating and prosecuting those responsible for crimes against humanity, regardless of their position or affiliation.
It's a tall order, especially in a country that's still so politically fragile. But I can see why it's important. Without justice, there can be no real peace.
That's the crux of it. Reconciliation, reconstruction, and accountability need to go hand in hand. And the international community has a responsibility to support all three, not just with words, but with concrete actions and resources.
It sounds like the international community has a lot on its plate and a lot of responsibility to bear.
There's no doubt about it. The Syrian crisis is one of the most complex and challenging issues of our time, but it's also an opportunity for the international community to show its commitment to human rights, to peace, to justice.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. We've talked about the historical context, the complexities of the conflict, the devastating human cost, the daunting challenges, and the potential for both hope and further turmoil.
We've delved into a lot of heavy stuff. It's important to acknowledge the immense suffering that's taken place and the difficult road ahead, but we also need to remember the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
Absolutely. And the power of hope. Even amidst the ruins, there's always the possibility for renewal, for a brighter future.
Indeed. And in that spirit of hope, let's move on to explore some potential scenarios for Syria's future and what role the international community can play in shaping that future. As we've seen, Syria is at a crossroads, grappling with the legacy of a brutal war and facing a future filled with both possibilities and perils. It's a moment of transition, a chance to break free from the old patterns of authoritarianism and forge a new path towards peace, stability, and prosperity.
It's like they're standing on the edge of a blank page with the opportunity to write a new chapter in their history. But as we've discussed, that page could just as easily be filled with continued conflict and suffering if things go wrong. So let's try to imagine what a truly positive future for Syria might look like. What needs to happen for them to turn this corner and build a better tomorrow?
Well, for starters, they need a political system that's genuinely inclusive and representative of all Syrians. This means moving beyond the sectarian divisions that fueled the conflict and embracing a system that protects the rights of all citizens regardless of their ethnicity, religion, or political affiliation.
You've touched on this before, but I think it's worth emphasizing. This idea of inclusivity seems crucial, especially after a conflict that's been so deeply divisive. But how do you actually build that kind of inclusivity in a society that's been so fractured?
It's a monumental task, no doubt. It requires a shift in mindset, a willingness to move beyond the zero-sum politics of the past and embrace a vision of shared power and collective responsibility. It also requires a commitment to addressing the root causes of the conflict, including economic inequality, political disenfranchisement, and systemic discrimination.
So it's not just about changing the faces in government. It's about changing the very structures of power and ensuring that everyone has a stake in the future of the country.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where everyone feels like they belong, like their voices are heard, and like they have a chance to participate in shaping their own destiny.
It sounds like a pretty radical departure from the way things have been done in Syria for the past few decades.
It would certainly be a major transformation, but I think it's the only way to ensure lasting peace and stability. Without addressing these underlying issues, any political solution is likely to be fragile and short-lived.
And let's be realistic. Even if they manage to create this more inclusive political system, they're still going to face the daunting task of rebuilding the country after years of war. The infrastructure is in ruins, the economy is shattered, millions of people are displaced. Where do they even begin to tackle these challenges?
It's a massive undertaking. There's no question about that. It's going
Sure.
to require a long-term commitment from both the Syrian people and the international community. But I think it's important to remember that rebuilding isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about rebuilding lives, rebuilding communities, and rebuilding hope.
That's a good point. It's about more than just physical reconstruction. It's about social and psychological healing as well. But let's get practical for a moment. What are some concrete steps that can be taken to move this process forward? Where should they focus their efforts?
Well, as we've discussed, providing humanitarian aid is paramount. Millions of people are in desperate need of food, shelter, medical care, and other essential services. Meeting these immediate needs is crucial for stabilizing the situation and preventing further suffering.
Right. Addressing that humanitarian crisis is obviously a top priority. But what about the longer-term challenges? How do they start to rebuild a functioning economy, create jobs, and give people a sense of hope for the future?
Investing in education is essential. A generation of Syrian children has lost years of schooling due to the conflict. Providing access to quality education is crucial for rebuilding the country's human capital, fostering critical thinking, and creating opportunities for young people to contribute to a more peaceful and prosperous future.
Education is definitely key. But what about the physical infrastructure? The roads, the bridges, the power plants, the hospitals, all of that has been devastated by the war. Rebuilding all of that is going to take a massive amount of resources and expertise.
Absolutely. And that's where the international community has a crucial role to play. Providing financial assistance, technical expertise, and helping to create a favorable environment for investment are all essential for supporting Syria's reconstruction efforts.
But as we've discussed before, there's a real risk that this aid could be mismanaged or even end up fueling corruption. How do we ensure that these resources are actually used to benefit the Syrian people and not just line the pockets of a select few?
That's a legitimate concern. Transparency and accountability are crucial. The international community needs to work closely with Syrian civil society organizations, local communities, and independent monitors to ensure that aid is distributed fairly and used effectively.
So it's not just about throwing money at the problem. It's about making sure that money is used wisely and that the rebuilding process is inclusive and benefits all Syrians.
Precisely. It's about empowering local communities, supporting grassroots initiatives, and creating a system where Syrians themselves are the drivers of their own recovery.
It sounds like a complex and challenging process, but also one that holds a lot of potential for positive change.
I agree. The road ahead for Syria is long and uncertain, but I believe that with the right kind of support, both from within Syria and from the international community, they can overcome these challenges and build a brighter future.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the historical context of the conflict, the complex interplay of internal and external factors, the devastating human cost, and the daunting challenges that lie ahead. But we've also seen glimpses of hope, moments of resilience, and the possibility of a brighter future.
It's a story that's far from over. The coming months and years will be critical in determining Syria's fate. But I think it's important to remember that even amidst the ruins, there's always the potential for renewal, for healing, and for the human spirit to triumph over adversity.
And that's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery. We'll be back soon to delve into another fascinating topic, exploring the complexities of our world and the forces shaping our collective destiny. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the world around you.